Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Well, today we look at evidence of the increasing threat against the Sikh community of transnational repression across the Americas, the growth of right-wing hate crimes, and an old familiar face of the Indian extreme right shows his ugly face once again. We also look at the irony of the minority community of Hindus in Bangladesh complaining how they're being marginalised and even attacked. And in the Punjab, how people are dying over a simple unpaid bill. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. Thanks for joining us and being a part of our show.
Indeed, and together we'll be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. Of course, as usual, we'll be taking a look at lots of your great comments which have been filling up below our videos. Thanks so much as always for those. So, to start us off with, James, what do you got for us for today?
Well, let's take a look at the irony of the Hindus yelling and screaming in Bangladesh about being marginalized, about being a minority that's being discriminated against, and about hate crimes being perpetrated against them. Now, of course, we are not supporting that. We do not support any violent attacks on anybody, and we want to see peace throughout all of these regions. However, with the number of Muslims, of Sikhs, of Christians, and Dalits, and others throughout India who are suffering the same problem in India by the hands of the Hindus, it's just irony to see them complaining here. With that said, of course, they do have a right to complain when they are being targeted, just as the Sikhs and everyone else in India does. Now, if they want to see things done to support them, I hope that they will spread a word and keep that in mind to make lives better for minorities within India. Now, what they are finding, though, is that when they are trying to cross the border, as 500 to 800 of the Hindus did, trying to get back into India, India's border patrol refused them and sent them back to Bangladesh. They do not allow them to cross the border, even though they are in fear of their lives. So the humanitarian crisis is growing there after a very tumultuous several weeks since the resignation and fleeing of the country by their premier, their prime minister. Now, keeping in mind that the Hindus are a minority there, they are suffering from a lot of misinformation. Something that Angus, you and I talk about all the time is the power of the internet for good, but also the power to spread false narratives. And this is happening. There are much exaggerated numbers of deaths and rapes and other issues focused against the Hindus. And this, of course, is perpetrating even further panic by the Hindus that are stuck in Bangladesh. With that, it also encourages more people within Bangladesh, the Muslims and others, to turn around and perpetrate more violence, thinking that it's already being done everywhere else, that they want to be a part of the in crowd, so to speak, that they are going to act like others do. And it's, again, that pack mentality. So we're hoping that a peaceful solution, or at least a calming of the waters, can happen in Bangladesh, that the Hindus see a reduction in the violence and the crimes against them, the arsons, the assaults and so forth. But we really hope that it transcends into the world of India, saying, okay, we know what it's like to have this problem. Let's fix it and let's open our country to a much better cooperation between all. But I'm not going to hold my breath waiting on that, Angus. And I'm sure you're in the same position where you're not going to hold your breath.
Yeah, we use this word, both of us have used the word irony. It's deeply ironic what's happening here. And of course, we certainly don't condone any violence against any minority, and particularly Hindus in Bangladesh. But yes, we often talk about Hindus in India, and we often warn Hindus in India as part of our show. Look, you've got to wake up to the fact that if you marginalise people, it could easily happen to you. It's all right if you're the majority, and you're turning a blind eye at best. Worse, you're perpetrating it, but at least even if you're turning a blind eye to it, you are effectively complicit in intimidating, harassing or whatever, or marginalising minorities. Now, again, if you're the Hindu majority, as you are in India, that's fine. You know, you can get away with that because it's not affecting you directly. But when the shoe is on the other foot, here in Bangladesh, we've got the majority Muslims are now intimidating and harassing and attacking the Hindu minority. Yeah, that's what it's like to be a minority. So that whole message needs to get through to India. Look, because you are treating your own minorities with such disdain and such aggression, you have no moral standpoint to complain about it in Bangladesh. Now, of course, everybody has a moral standpoint to call out any intimidation and attacks of minorities. But the Hindus in India need to wake up to the fact this is happening in your own country against your own minorities, whether it's Sikhs, Christians, Jains, Buddhists, whatever. That message is very clear. The other message, which of course is this humanitarian tragedy in many ways, it's of course many people, particularly Hindus, are trying to flee Bangladesh and cross the border into Tripura, Meghalaya and other neighbouring states in northeast India. And India has been quite robust in their message. Certainly the first ministers of these states have been very robust in their messages, saying, no, we are closing the borders. We do not want Bangladeshis of any type, of any religious background pouring into India. And of course, one does sympathise to some degree with these states because in the past they have had a history of people crossing the borders and diluting their own demographics, their own indigenous mix, which of course we've talked about in the Punjab. So there is a balance here, of course, with all these things. There is a balance, but of course there is a humanitarian element to this as well. Now the question is, are they fleeing genuine intimidation? Are they fleeing genuine threat? Well, not only the reporters on the ground can let us know of that, but all in all, it's a very dangerous time in this region, and as many people within Bangladesh, and particularly Yunus and some of the key leading figures have said, the key political figures have said, we must get democratic process in motion as quickly as possible. We must move beyond this limbo period, which is one of the most dangerous times for any country, for any society to go through this. Any change of, particularly a violent change of government, it needs stability as quickly as possible so life can move on and democracy can reimpose itself. So thoughts with Bangladesh, but thoughts of course with those Indian neighbouring states, and again thoughts with the Hindus who are suffering. Our hearts go out, and of course this is the basis of Sikhi, is that there will be no pleasure from the Sikh community seeing this happening. It will just be a case of, we told you so. You know, we've been warning about this. It is immoral in principle, and now you are suffering, so you need to fight this same issue in India. So yeah, interesting story, James, an interesting angle on that one.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me that the Sikhs end up assisting them in that fight to get to safety, because they don't discriminate any religion or any faith-based group or any other minority. So they don't hold anything about or against the minorities, the majorities. They see everyone as equal. And just in closing on that one, I just wanted to bring up, Yunus himself had said on Saturday that there was no room for discrimination in the country. He went on to quote, or was quoted as saying, our responsibility is to build a new Bangladesh. Don't differentiate between religion, which I thought was a very important message for everyone in Bangladesh, but also around the world, not to differentiate between religions, treat everyone as the same.
And of course, that's sorry, James. Yeah, the Indian right wing are the ones who like to whip up this hatred, and of course, they are the ones who are on social media on a daily basis warning about the threat of Islam. And of course, in Bangladesh, formerly East India, which is where the Muslims moved to, as well as Pakistan, of course, massively majority Muslim. And of course, the right-wing Hindus are whipping up this. Oh, the Muslims are attacking the Hindus. They'll be behind a lot of the propaganda being disseminated about this. So yeah, right-wing once again rears its ugly head.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really a tough position of seeing things on the internet, is you've got to be able to disseminate the truth from the fiction. And a lot of people don't take the time to do that, especially when they're already fearful for their safety and then see other exaggerated reports of these numbers. So as we talk about this, we're going to move on to the next story, and I hope that you will take interest in this as much as I did, because it's a very important social matter that's happening in Punjab. And this, of course, is a rehabilitation center that is there for the community's lost, forgotten, and those who have just been tossed to the curb, so to speak. And this organization, as I said, is Sikh founded and run on those principles of caring for each other, for those who have been forgotten, for those who have been left behind, and for those who have just totally been ignored. So this facility, though, is running without power, and it has been for a little bit of time. And this is over a fight with the power company, which, of course, is state-owned and operated. They have a bill outstanding. However, they are disputing that for the amount, as well as the government had offered to assist in several capacities, including helping with funding, because they do take in the indigent, the people that need recovery. They've even rescued 15 babies, at least, from, parents who couldn't care for them and were going to give them up or just toss them aside. And this organization comes to the rescue of those in need. Now, they call them inmates, and I think that might be just an interpretation or a translation because they're not really inmates, they are patients. And with that said, there are babies, there are women, there are children, there are men. And over the last 2 months, it's been very cold, very miserable because they don't have the ability to power everything such as heat, such as lighting, such as the kitchen equipment. Not all kitchen equipment is run on gas or diesel generators, so it's very difficult to supply that much needed power through the generators that they're now operating. This has, as I said, caused the death of 14 patients and the illness of countless others, but also the suffering of many, many more. This facility is a godsend to those who need the help the most. And although the government has stepped in and made promises, they have yet to fulfill them. They have yet to help this organization to continue on. They are a non-government organization that relies on the support of the public and other donors. They, like many others, when the pandemic hit, lost a massive amount of funding from the public and from others who were contributing. Of course, business contributions, when businesses were shut down or were impacted, they couldn't give either. So this has just been precipitating a problem and, just making it snowball till something is got to give. And what gave was the company shutting off the hydro, causing just unbelievable torture and punishment to the people in need. And this just bothers me so much because as a human, you don't want to see people in bad positions. You want to try to help people and you want to be able to see them comfortable. They don't have to be rich. They don't have to be, living in a mansion, but to have the basics of a bed and warmth in the winter is just, that should be a right of every person. And to see a hydro company or a power company shutting off to a organization that is giving so much back just sickens me to see what it's become here. So I implore that the government get off their butt and find the help that they've been promising and get it off of paper and into the account to make sure that it makes a difference where it's needed. These lives may not mean much to the government. They may not mean much to those who have the ability and the funds and, the comfortable lifestyle. But I guarantee that these people matter not only to most in the world when we look at human rights and caring for people, but they also are family members to somebody. And if the family can't support them through these tragedies and through these tough times, then how are we as a world and how is the government there in India supposed to make things better when they can't even supply the basics to the most needy of them all? And that's, again, in the UK, Angus, we know there's a lot of strain on charitable organizations after the pandemic and other things.
Yeah, the pandemic had a huge impact on so many different parts of society. And actually, in fact, we've noticed here, even here in the UK, many charities suffered massively as a result of the pandemic. For various reasons, funding was cut, funding from the public just reduced. It did have all sorts of unpredictable knock-on effects on particularly the charitable sector. This story itself, it's very hard to judge because, of course, we don't know the absolute details of this other than what we can see as observers and just from a purely humanitarian basis. I mean, at the end of the day, a building it needs electricity to run and somebody has to pay for that electricity. And that is an unavoidable fact. Yeah. The question here is what are the actual mechanics of making this happen? Now, lives here are at risk, and I think the difference between one of the main differences between a third world country and a first world country is how it treats its sick and its vulnerable parts of society. In a third world country, where most people, frankly, are living to survive on a subsistence level, then of course the vulnerable in society are just left to fend for themselves and invariably die, suffer and die. That is one of the sad tragedies of third world countries. First world countries take care of their sick and their vulnerable because they have the resources and the will to look after those who are most vulnerable in their society. So India needs to ask itself a question: are you a third world country or are you a first world country? And unfortunately, when we see stories like this, it does raise the question, well, if you are a first world country, then the government has a responsibility and society as a whole has a responsibility to ensure that its most vulnerable are taken care of. And if people are dying, as it seems to be the case reported in this situation, then there is a moral and a societal responsibility to step in and stop that happening, whatever it takes. And the government, who has a space program, I can easily throw in here, the government has a space program. It can afford to send probes to Mars, to the moon, to the sun, as it's very proud to boast on the world's media. And yet we've got 14 vulnerable people of its most vulnerable in its own society dying because of a simple unpaid electricity bill. And one does need to question the priorities of the Indian government, a nation that actually has, sadly, some of the worst poverty on the planet. There are huge amounts of people living in India in the most appalling circumstances, and yet the nation has a space program. This disparity, this gap between the rich and the poor. We've talked about that wedding, the billionaire who got married recently, whose guests included some of the world's wealthiest people, and yet again, we have stories like this. So I'm afraid my finger points at India and saying this is your responsibility. Your most vulnerable in your society are dying because you are not looking after them. You're not taking care of them. It's up to the Sikh communities, as shown here once again, who are trying to help the most vulnerable in India's society. Where's the help coming from the government? It's just not enough. India has everything to blame for this one, James. It's shocking.
Absolutely. And I mean, this NGO is saving the government. Well, maybe not the Indian government, the way they treat their citizens, but in a Western world, I mean, we would be remiss in not paying a hydro bill for an organization that's caring for so many people. Like, it's ridiculous.
It is. It's shocking. As I said earlier, it's if you want to call yourself a first world country, as India is so keen to try and do, you've got to act like a first world country. With that comes responsibilities, plain and simple. So, yeah, interesting story, James. Thanks for that. And, well, let's move on to bigger topics now in terms of geography and transnational repression. A story that we have reported on, sadly, for so long, that has been going on, a problem that's been occurring across the Indian diaspora for, well, several years at least. And unfortunately, it's still going on. And across the Americas, it is still very much an ongoing threat to particularly the Sikh diaspora and specifically the Khalistani members of the Sikh community. And Reuters have just released an interesting press release. They've just done an investigation and a big story into what is happening about transnational repression. They've talked to many Sikhs in the community across the Americas just to try and get a flavour of just how bad this threat is from India. And they talked to, as part of their investigation, they talked to a very high-profile Sikh in California, Dr. Jasmeet Bains. She was the first Sikh American elected to the California Assembly. She was also the person who managed to get the California state to adopt a resolution declaring the genocide in India in 1984 a genocide in terms of definition. And when they talked to her, she told them many stories, one of which was 4 men came to her office in August last year. And this was shortly after California had adopted that resolution. And the men, who appeared to be of Indian origin, warned that they would do whatever it takes to go after her. And that threat was just the beginning. She said, since then, she's received more than 100 threatening text messages. And she's seen someone taking photos of her home from a parked truck, and the lock on her mailbox was broken repeatedly. And shortly after Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister, said he had credible evidence of India's involvement in the killing of Najjar, Jasmeet Bains said that the Sergeant-at-Arms conducted a security assessment at her own home and urged her, warned her that she needed to take precautions. And the FBI itself contacted her about threats that they knew against her office shortly afterwards. So she said she began screening phone calls and avoiding travelling alone. So she's actually having to change her lifestyle because of these threats. That's how serious they were and how significant they were, including requesting security details whilst attending official events. Now, Reuters spoke to 19 Sikh community leaders, including 3 elected US officials. These are high-profile elected officials in the US state that Reuters spoke to. And they said that they or their organisations have been targeted with threats and harassment over the last year. And the Sikhs that Reuters spoke to described experiencing regularly online harassment, surveillance at their own homes and places of worship, release of personal details online, that's called doxing, and what's called swatting, which is where people file false police reports to try and trigger a law enforcement response. And 7 Sikh activists said that their lives were in danger, had been told that their lives were in danger by law enforcement, by the FBI or the RCMP, and told that their lives were in danger without specifying, of course, the source of the threat. But of course, they all knew where it was coming from. And the FBI did warn the Sikh community more broadly about this threat of transnational repression. Now, many of the threats described by Reuters, by the Sikh activists, originated from anonymous accounts on X or Twitter. Others came from unknown phone numbers and anonymous text messages. And Reuters did actually reach out to the Indian embassy in both Washington and in Canada. And of course, they reached out to Modi's office itself. And of course, unsurprisingly, they did not respond to repeated requests for comment, which in itself says an awful lot. There was no denial, there was just no response at all. We talked about Govt Punjab. He, of course, has been the subject of a known assassination attempt that the Department of Justice in the US uncovered. And Punjab says himself that he continues, even now, to receive violent death threats online, including statements like, "Wherever you run, I will come there and I will enter it and I will kill you." In April this year, another Twitter threat that Reuters saw themselves, someone wrote, "Polonium 210 arrived in DC." That's a direct reference to that radioactive material that Russia used to assassinate Alexander Litvinenko. And now that Gurpratap Singh Pannoon is receiving threats with that same material. Pritpal Singh, who's the founder of the American Sikh Caucus Committee, that's an advocacy group which supports Khalistan, also said, he told Reuters that threats and surveillance continued after he received an FBI warning last June. A few days after that warning from the FBI, he said a strange car pulled up and surveilled his California home. And he said he noticed a second instance of surveillance in November. And these episodes were actually captured on home security cameras, and that footage has been passed to the FBI. And on June the 18th, that's the anniversary of Najjar's killing, one account on X wrote in Hindi that it was time to plan your murder. Another death threat, clear death threat. And another X account wrote, "RIP Pritpal," once again, another death threat. Now, Freedom House, which is an organisation that monitors global civil liberties, one of their spokesmen said that the campaign represents what they call a kind of worst-case scenario for transnational repression, when a major state acts completely outside the law, using all the tools at its disposal to silence dissent in another country. So they are saying that India, a nation itself, is acting completely outside the law. And again, we talk about India trying to call itself democracy. And the spokesperson said that India appeared to have a complete disregard of the potential diplomatic, legal and political consequences of this campaign. Another example that Reuters uncovered, Harjap Singh Jappi, a grocery store owner in Indiana, who was charged by India with terrorism-related crimes. So he was accused by India of being a terrorist for his prior involvement with Sikhs for Justice, that's Gurpatwant Singh Pannin's organisation. And he said that FBI agents came to his own home asking about his possible involvement in a bombing in the late 1980s. So India has got in contact with the FBI and said, oh, this gentleman, Harjap Singh Jappi, has been involved. He's a terrorist. Here's some evidence of his terrorist activity. So the FBI came to this gentleman's home and interrogated him. And the agents told him that India had sent the Bureau some records related to the attack. So the FBI said, yeah, we've received records of this attack, of the evidence of you being involved. Turns out, Mr. Jappi was 44 at the time now. He was a child at the time of this event. So again, it was completely made up by India. And this again is an example of what's called swatting. And FBI has said, unfortunately, it is a regular thing from India. False referrals are a common feature of transnational repression. It's mischievous. It's just intimidation by any other means. So this article is really just, again, a summary of everything that we already know anyway. It's just confirmation of the existence of this dreadful threat that's coming from India. And not just from the online Hindutva army, it's coming in the real world. It's people actually parking outside Sikhs' homes, watching them, intimidating them, harassing them. And it's coming from a multilateral layer from India. It's coming from online, the Hindutva army. It's coming from people on the ground. It's coming clearly from criminals on the ground, Hindutva criminals. But it's also coming from higher up. It's obviously being endorsed and condoned and probably financed by higher up the chain, the political chain in India, the RSS, the BJP. It's appalling. Again, we talk about India. Do you want to be a third world country or a first world country? We expect this from China, from Russia, but we don't expect it from India. Or do we, James? Unfortunately, we are now expecting it from India. These are the tactics of India. This doesn't belong in the modern world, does it?
Exactly. And of course, foreign organizations such as the FBI would be failing in their duties if they didn't at least go and speak to the individuals when they get these false reports. And even at the FBI's own words, that they get regular false reports from India. And, you know, they have to follow it up as a law enforcement agency, because that one bit of information, there could be a thread of truth to something that they discover upon follow-up. But in the majority of the cases, they've said themselves, these are just bullshit accusations, and it's meant to intimidate and harass citizens who are, you know, American citizens or Canadian citizens, UK, foreign citizens on foreign soil that they just want to mess with, interfere with, and threaten lives of.
Yeah, unfortunately, the FBI are clearly wise to this now. The FBI are wise to India's tactics now. And when they're receiving evidence like this, they're clearly treating it, well, they obviously have to treat it seriously, but always at the same time, they realise that there is this regular occurrence now of fake information. So the credibility, India's losing its credibility now. India's law enforcers who are clearly colluding with, or trying to collude with law enforcement in the West, they're losing credibility because the evidence that they're passing is clearly false. We've seen this in Canada, of course, James, regularly with accusations against what they call, India call terrorists, the Khalistani terrorists in Canada. And Canadian, the RCMP, have investigated all these people accused of being terrorists by India, and they've all been cleared. So it's very clear to me, James, particularly India. Yeah.
Yeah, and here in Canada, when we hear the word terrorism or terrorist, we always envision the worst. And so we, turn a very keen ear to listen to what's going on there. But when it comes to the way that the India government uses the word, I mean, if you say one wrong word about Modi, you can be labeled a terrorist. And that is what a lot of Canadians and Western individuals fail to understand or to see, that just because they spoke up against the government, they are labeled a terrorist. It's not because they are planning some nefarious act against a society or a community. It's because they spoke out against Modi or against the BJP or government policy. So that's something that really has to get into the education and the mind of the Western world, such as here in Canada.
Yeah, they're not the tactics of a democracy, they are the tactics of a totalitarian fascist regime, plain and simple. If you want to label your political opponents as terrorists, then unfortunately you are a fascist. There's no other way of describing it. So, okay, let's move on to my second story. And following the similar theme, actually, unfortunately, of anti-Sikh problems, hate crimes and things like that. We've reported, unfortunately, of many situations, not just transnational repression coming from India. Unfortunately, the aggression is also coming from within. It is coming from the right wing, and we've seen this across the Western world, particularly recently. And another story that's been released across the media is the rise of the far right. And unfortunately, within Canada and America, but specifically Canada in recent months, there has been a rise of the far right targeting South Asian and particularly Sikh Canadians, deliberately trying to incite anti-immigrant hate. Now, anti-hate experts in Canada, they're saying that the far right is starting to shift its focus to spreading conspiracy theories and saying hate towards South Asian and Sikh communities in Canada. Now, in recent weeks, many far-right influencers in Canada have ramped up their attacks against Canadians of South Asian origin, and specifically Sikhs particularly, telling them to, and the message is, go back to their country. And part of this methodology is they're blaming immigrants for all of society's ills, like, for example, unemployment or housing problems.
Yeah.
And others have taken to filming or even photographing people without their consent and encouraging their followers, these are influencers, encouraging their followers to do the same while spreading misinformation and harmful narratives about immigrants. Now, a journalist and researcher within the Canadian Anti-Hate Network says he's noticed that there is a visible increase in content targeting of South Asians within Canada. And he says that the far right in Canada has particularly honed in, for some reason, on these South Asian and Sikh communities as their latest targets. And the far right tend to sort of move in themes. They sort of go from one to the next. And unfortunately, for some reason, they seem to have focused in this year on the South Asian Sikh communities. Last year, apparently, the heavy focus was on the LGBTQ communities, where they focus their hate and on all their efforts to try and target those communities. And this year it seems to have switched, for whatever reasons, to the Sikh community. And in the midst of social media posts targeting specifically turbaned Sikh men, a hate crime was reported. There's lots of examples of hate crimes that they reported. In Ontario, only a few weeks ago, after a man was allegedly spat on and had his turban knocked off and stepped on. And there are lots of other incidents, including another Sikh who was allegedly attacked, had his turban removed and stolen in Ontario. Another man in Ontario was attacked and threatened to be run over for wearing a kirpan. And of course, all these are very Sikh-specific crimes, because of course the turban, the kirpan, all major parts of major articles of faith. And of course they do make Sikhs stand out in society. It makes them very easy targets for the far right. And the president of the World Sikh Organisation, Danish Singh, he said that Sikhs are, of course, a very visible community because of these articles of faith. It does make them easy targets for these hate attacks. And they're seeing hateful messages targeting Sikhs online generated by ultra-right-wing groups in Canada. But here's where it starts getting concerning and interesting to some degree. But these are being amplified and promoted by Indian nationalist social media accounts. So unfortunately, of course, the Hindutva extremists from India are using the right wing in Canada. They are using them as a tool to target Sikhs. Of course, they are a proxy for the Hindutva extremists. It's very easy for those in India who want to specifically target the Sikh community to try and ramp up the hatred. They're feeding the hatred. They're helping the right wing in Canada. They're encouraging them. They're really pushing them and provoking them to turn on the Sikh community. They're getting the right wing in Canada to do their dirty work for them.
Yeah.
And the Global Project Against Hate and Racism has reported a large increase in hate and slurs directed specifically towards South Asians globally since January last year. And anxieties amongst the Canadian society around losing their jobs, the perceived subversion of white people, and both distrust and anger towards South Asians who are blamed for these problems are prevalent across these platforms. And this is really a very typical tool of the right wing. They're leveraging the problems among society, like when hard times hit, as hard times have indeed hit, with crisis of cost of living crises, particularly here in the UK we've seen it, is the right wing use people's problems. You know, if they're struggling to keep a roof over their heads, struggling to feed their families, then they're always looking for someone to blame. And it's a very easy way to blame. Oh, it's the immigrants. The immigrants are behind this. And how easy then to specify it's those Sikhs who are to blame for this. They're coming here, stealing our jobs. That's a typical mantra of the right wing. And the Sikh Press Association also weighed into the debate, and they said that the far right is politicising this hate. And Canada seems to be experiencing a worrying spike in the brazenness of this anti-Sikh sentiment. It seems thousands of Canadians are on social media daily spreading hate about all minorities. And within this, there seems to be a particular venom for Sikh communities. Why? Why Sikh communities specifically? Who are accused of infiltrating government, monopolising the trucking industry, and yet simultaneously downgrading the quality of life here. So again, it mirrors what we've just been saying. That ironically, because the Sikh community has, as a generalisation, managed to succeed and integrate so successfully throughout Western nations, they have built very successful lives. They've built businesses. They've built successful commerce. They've managed to work their way up in society, getting really good levels of achievement in whether it's the educational sector, the legal system, whatever. They've achieved it, and even in politics. But the far right and the people who are whipping this up, and particularly coming from India, how easy is it for Hindutva to say, yeah, look at these Sikhs, they're taking your jobs. You're all suffering whilst these Sikhs are succeeding. It must be their fault. Very insidious argument. And the same report also noted that prominent Canadian white supremacist groups, I don't know if you've heard of these people, James, Diagolon. I've not come across them, obviously specific to Canada, but they're led by Canadian far-right influencer Jeremy McKenzie. They've apparently recently ramped up their hate speech and racism towards South Asians. And they particularly call for first world countries to quarantine India. Otherwise, Indians will colonise every first world country. And Diagolon has said it's calling for the deportation of all Indians. Interesting, it's not specific to the Sikhs, but it is all Indians need to be kicked out of the West. And it sadly is a trend that's gaining popularity across Europe. And they call it remigration, which argues for ethnically cleansing the continent of non-Europeans through forced deportations. And this anti-immigrant sentiment and racism, of course, we've seen that massively here in the UK. And rioters have, of course, been carrying out violence and attacks targeting immigrants and asylum seekers. And the trend does mirror tactics being used in Canada. And one of the organisations has stated that they think the anti-immigrant narratives are unfortunately resonating with a large number of people across North America and Western Europe right now. And you can see when you look at a lot of Canadians' far-right social media that they are actively looking to these issues, connecting with influencers and groups, talking about similar things and resharing the same content, this misinformation. And they say that many far-right figures are convinced that they are being replaced and are responding to that threat in many different ways, adding that the language being used is militaristic and could lead to potential escalation. And this is what could lead to when you people talking about it in military terms, about a coming war. So again, they're trying to ramp up this, they're basically ramping up what is essentially a very low-level problem in terms of the argument is, they're coming over here and taking our jobs. Now they're talking about it in military terms. We've seen riots that have happened. Unfortunately, these riots have been fairly disorganised. There's certainly no, I would say, no military organisation behind it. Ironically, the far left, and this is back to an argument I've talked about in the past, that the far left have actually been out and not just protesting, but their protests often turn violent. But those do seem very well organised. And when we talk about military organisation, they appear with ready printed banners. There's a lot of money and a lot of organisation behind those. So I equally blame the extreme right and the extreme left for this. I don't take any sides. I'm in the middle. I just represent the ordinary person in the middle. And of course, our minority populations, certainly here in the UK, who find themselves in the middle of this battle. And we talk about military terms. There is this escalation almost up to military status between the extremists on the far left and the far right. As I said yesterday, they meet up in the middle. They are the fascists of our society. They are the danger. The extreme far right and the extreme far left, they are the danger to our society. They are using these sorts of tactics that we just talked about to try and whip up hatred and division. They are trying to divide whites against non-whites. They are trying to whip up the inter-community hatred, the Hindus against the Muslims against the Sikhs, and vice versa. They are the people that are dangerous, and we all must be aware of this. And fortunately, there are all these organisations warning, look, these hate crimes are on the increase, but we've got to look, what is it that's whipping up? We've got to look at the root causes of these. Quite often, of course, it is these far-right extremists, but it is also the far-left extremists who, ironically, and I see this here in the UK, the far-left extremists are equally guilty of racism, ironically, as it turns out, but they in turn are the fascists just as much as the far-right are the fascists. These are the extremes that we need to drive out from our society. We, the majority in the middle, we need the sensible people, the sensible thinking people, the intelligent people need to turn on these people, call out this dreadful extremism for what it is, James. We see it all around the world. Unfortunately now, we're seeing it in Canada just as much as everywhere else.
We are, and unfortunately it's being politicized here to a level that people like Pierre Poilievre, who is the opposition leader, is using it as a platform for next year's election to ramp things up based on immigration and the hazards and risks of immigration policy. So he's really adding fuel to the fire, which is based on a lot of out and out lies. Online, I've noticed it here in Canada, the huge increase in the racially motivated bullshit posts that are out there. And it's frustrating because I look at it and they're blaming things like crime, and yet they are blaming certain criminal acts in the community on one race or another when it's absolutely not even true. I mean, it's just blatant, outright lies. People complain that they're taking the jobs. Well, I mean, Tim Hortons, one of our national institutions here, a coffee shop, I mean, they brought in over 1,700 foreign workers because they can't find people to do it here in Canada. The transportation industry, the industry is suffering a huge downturn in revenue, but it's got nothing to do with people coming into the country to take those jobs. We can't find enough people to work. I mean, my brother owns a trucking and moving company, Kerry Movers in Surrey. He can't find people to work half the days because there's just not enough of a workforce, and that's where controlled immigration is so essential. Berry farms and other types of farms, again, they need the foreign labor because they can't source the employees here in Canada. So to blame them on the fact that your lazy ass is sitting on a couch watching television eating potato chips instead of looking for a job, which there are plenty out there, they just look for the easy way out. And again, as I said, it's being politicized, and that really irritates me as well. And I'm going off on a rant, but at the same time, it's being blamed on people that absolutely are a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I agree with you, Rant, in many ways. There is an agenda at play that we've noticed, and we have talked about to some degree. There is a definite agenda at play. It's not left and it's not right. There is just an agenda to try and create division and hatred in our societies across the world. We're particularly seeing it across the Western world. And as I said, it's not far right, it's not even far left. It's just there is this element of society, and just to use incorrect label, I say the far left. But even the far left, or these people who are behind that extreme, are deliberately provoking the far right. There is this, the extremes are provoking each other. And actually, I think those extremes are one and the same thing. Deliberately trying to provoke, I'll use one silly example, positive discrimination in the employment industry. Quite often it's, there's one extreme who says, right, we must have a quota of minorities in certain jobs. Okay, fine. All that has achieved is it's promoting people who actually frankly don't deserve those jobs, and it provokes the right wing, it provokes the racists, and it gets them to, it's whipping up hatred, where before, actually, yes, racism has always been a problem, but certainly here in the UK, our communities have integrated fabulously. Racism was really on the decrease, and then there's this new agenda that's happened in the last few years, coming from all sides, that is for some reason deliberately provoking the population into turning on each other, it's creating racism where racism never used to exist. I know people who are now starting to turn racist because they're almost being provoked into it. Why? Because I don't know. There's this agenda going on that is designed by, I don't know who's behind it, but they are using both sides of the political spectrum. And again, I don't think it even falls into left and right, but somebody is provoking our communities, our society, into trying to turn on each other, in trying to turn the whites against the blacks against the whites, the browns against each other, as I've said before, the Hindus against the Muslims, against the Sikhs. Something is there whipping up this hatred. Now, it doesn't help that we've got India and the far right in India, but they almost themselves are tools of this agenda. And these people, certainly on the left here in the UK, again, I forget the name of the organisation, but they are tools of this agenda. They're being pushed and financed by somebody, or some parties are financing these extremist organisations to try and promote this hatred and division in our society. I don't know why, I don't know what the end game is, but we all must be aware of it. We must look at it for what it is. Try and take 10 steps back. Look at the bigger picture. What's going on? Why are we all being whipped up into turning on each other? What's behind it? It's very sinister, but as I keep saying, it's also conspiratorial. But anyway, let's move on to yet another tool of extremists. And this is a character on social media. He's quite a familiar character who broadcasts. He has a YouTube channel. In fact, we've reported on his YouTube channel on a few occasions. This is Major Gaurav Arya. I don't know actually how to pronounce his name. Arya. And he's a former Indian military officer. I don't know how long he was in the army. But since leaving the Indian Army, he's set up a YouTube channel which has basically become a mouthpiece for the extreme right wing of India. It is a mouthpiece for Hindutva. And he obviously enjoys and gets off on promoting a right-wing nationalist extremist agenda. He's regularly turning on the Sikh community. He regularly berates the Sikh community, and he has a particular hatred against Khalistanis. And he's got quite a track record, this guy. And his latest one that's emerged, his latest hate speech, should we call it, that's emerged. I'll just translate what his latest video says. Today, it's in May, it's a couple of months ago. Today, it's the 8th of May. In 2025, there will be elections in Canada. India will put the pressure on directly and indirectly against Canada. Justin Trudeau's government will fall and another government will come. Of course, the right wing of India hate Trudeau because of what he's stood up for. It will be discussed with that government. The think tanks in Canada, the right-wing parties in Canada will be supported because there are a lot of right-wing parties in Canada. They will be supported. He's talking about financial support coming from India to support the right-wing in Canada. Whether financially, politically or diplomatically, they will be supported. After all, everyone needs money to do business. Without money, nothing happens. You need money, right? So they will be supported. This is the right wing of Canada. You will also get a Rwanda plan in which the Khalistanis will be thrown into an African country. Now, this reference is to a British policy of the last Conservative government to try and tackle illegal immigration into the UK is that the last government came up with a plan to send illegal immigrants, at least on a temporary basis, to Rwanda in Africa, whilst their immigration status was processed. And this right-wing major has referred to the Rwanda plan, saying that Canada is going to adopt a similar plan. They're going to ship Khalistanis, apparently. So if you were a supporter of Khalistan, you're going to get kicked out of Canada and sent to Rwanda. So now... this Major Gaurav Arya, he's basically broadcasting his his channel, and this whole message talks about this Rwanda plan, and what he calls is creating a national citizenship bill, which makes it easier to deport minorities. That's a bill that was introduced here in the UK, and that the Labour Party, actually to their credit, have cancelled. And they cancel this whole Rwanda initiative, at least for now anyway. And Arya has been previously noted for lots of fanatical rants against the Sikh community, particularly against Khalistanis, and including promising that India would eliminate UK-based Khalistani activist Bayabtar Singh Kandar, because of course Kandar, who died under very suspicious circumstances just after Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and this same person, Major Arya, said that Kandar should die, and this was because actually Kandar was falsely accused of removing the Indian flag from the Indian High Commission in London during a protest there, and it was not true. It was not him, but as a result of that, Major Arya said that India would eliminate Avtar Singh Kandar just shortly before he died, which makes your eyebrows raise a little. He also famously, as we reported on this channel last year, he called on organised crime to attack, maim and kill Khalistanis. He actually threatened himself to pay the mafia and biker crime gangs in the US to assassinate Sikhs in America. So this guy is dangerous. He really is something from the right wing that needs to be closed down. Is just a very dangerous, and he's got a huge following on YouTube, because of course the Indian right wing, the Hindutva extremists, love this guy. He is a mouthpiece for the extremists in India. So James, something that, and we'll keep highlighting this guy and keep highlighting his messages, but it's just pure and simple hate speech. It wouldn't be allowed here in the West, would it?
No, not at all, and that's part of the Canadian online laws that were passed. And some people were saying it was censorship, but it wasn't. It was just adjusting the laws for cases like this, where people cannot go online or otherwise and make threats against an individual or a group of people and then try to hide behind ideals, religious or other beliefs as a defense. So it's all about getting tougher on these people who are using platforms such as YouTube, such as X, formerly Twitter, and so on, to make threats and to really... They think there's no ramifications. They think there's no recourse for law enforcement or other agencies to come back on them. And this is where it has to get serious for the law enforcement agencies to start cracking down and making examples of idiots like this who just use the platforms to spread hate, dissent, and create division between communities.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, people like Major Arya are just tools. They are tools of a wider agenda. And it's the head of the serpent that we need to find. Who is the head of the serpent? Who's pushing all this hatred? They're the people that we should be identifying and finding out and stopping this hatred from all sides. It's appalling. Anyway, okay, time marches on. We must move on. And let's move on to our comments section. Lots of lovely comments, lots of interesting comments as always. Thank you so much to each and every one of you who has commented. My daily huge thank you, and in fact a thank you from both James and myself for all your comments, even the nasty ones. Yes, we have some nasty comments. I don't know why I'm laughing, but it's just interesting to always get the other side of the debate. And this is an old story. This is going back some time, and clearly it took a few people to discover one of our older stories and wade in with some quite robust comments. Real Thing said, "Get your facts right. there's a huge difference between Sikhs and Khalistanis. Sikh gurus are the one because of whom India is still in existence. Khalistanis are a terrorist organisation funded by Pakistan and China. Wow, okay, so this is quite a robust comment. This person claims there's a huge difference between Sikhs and Khalistanis. Now, it's not for me to speak for Sikhs, but I will, at least as an observer, I say, well, actually, every Khalistani that I've met is a very dedicated Sikh on every level. So I don't understand how you can differentiate and say that Khalistanis are not Sikhs. And I will leave it up to our wonderful audience to comment accordingly. If you are a Khalistani, do you regard yourself as a Sikh? I think I can predict that answer. And the final one, actually, that I will definitely pick up on. Khalistanis are a terrorist organisation funded by Pakistan and China. Okay, this is an interesting comment. Firstly, let's look at Pakistan. Pakistan does have an interest in promoting Khalistan because, of course, there is tension, and that's an understatement, between India and Pakistan. It is in Pakistan's interest to promote Khalistan because it's mischief, it provokes India. However, I would state factually that it is most unlikely that Khalistan is... Well, firstly, Khalistan is not a terrorist organisation. Let's just knock that one on the head for all the reasons that we talked about, and has been legally found to not be the case. So let's just immediately dismiss that. Is it funded by Pakistan? Well, show us your evidence, because there has been no evidence that any Khalistani organisation has been funded by Pakistan. This was raised a lot in the 1980s, where it was argued that the intelligence service of Pakistan was funding Bhindranwale and the rebels, so the freedom fighters, in the 1980s. Again, completely disputed. That is not the case. And it's something that we would totally dispute on every level. And funded by China, again. Now, China, in fact, funnily enough, as we referred to the other day, James, we talked about China. And actually, yeah, Khalistan, this came from a comment from somebody else who said, actually, that Khalistan should align with China. Interesting. It was an interesting line of thought, because China, of course, probably would want the establishment of Khalistan, particularly as an ally, because it potentially gives it more access, closer access to the Indian Ocean, a huge strategic advantage for China. Now, but is China funding Khalistan? Right. It is very, very unlikely because, as we said at the time yesterday or a few days ago, Sikhs and the Chinese state are so diametrically opposed, philosophically, ethically, on every level. China does not stand for anything that Sikhi stands for, and vice versa. See, I'm sure that everything that the Sikhi religion stands for is completely opposite and contrary to everything that the Chinese Communist administration stands for. So again, I just don't see it ever happening. James, I don't know if you've got any comments on that one.
No, I think that people like to try to draw parallels between things, but I just don't see it ever being the case.
Yeah, so I do take this comment seriously because this comment, obviously it was meant with slightly malicious intent, but actually you have made a good comment, yeah. and I actually disagree because I think the evidence disputes. I'm forgetting the whole Sikhs and Khalistani argument, which I think is silly. But this bit about Pakistan and China is a serious accusation, and I genuinely believe it is false. I don't think any Khalistani movement, even going back to the 1980s, was funded by Pakistan and China. There was talk about Russia financing, the KGB financing the whole movement in the 1980s, and again that was absolutely proved not true. In fact, quite the opposite, when there were some papers released by a KGB ex-spy, I think in the 1990s or the 2000s, which actually showed all the evidence that in fact Russia, the KGB, had been financing Indira Gandhi, the Indian government, not the Khalistanis. The Indira Gandhi had been financed by the KGB to turn on the Sikhs, and the talk at the time was because Sikhs, Russia, the KGB had courted the Sikhs to try and bring them on side, but the Sikhs were so devoted to their religion, particularly the youth, that they rejected the KGB. So instead the KGB turned to Indira Gandhi and said, right, we want you to turn on the Sikhs because they rejected us, etc., etc. So unfortunately, I have no stock with accusations like this. I think they are an interesting accusation, but blatantly false. Okay, another
Yeah, and
regular.
that's what I'd say. I wouldn't.
Yeah, another regular. I'm trying to think of the right word. Another commenter, let's be kind. Another regular critic, that's the word I'm looking for. Another regular critic of the channel, Anand. 95% of Indian Sikhs oppose Khalistan in the polls. Because of this, strong action against Khalistan is popular among Sikhs. Well, firstly, where do you get this 95% of Indian Sikhs oppose Khalistan from in the polls? Show me a poll, Anand. Show me one single poll that shows that 95% of Indian Sikhs are against Khalistan. I'm sorry, I totally reject that. I have not seen any poll. Show us your evidence, please. And we will show you evidence in the diaspora, the referendum. We will show you the evidence of the diaspora's attitude. Now, you're talking about the Punjab. We'll hold a referendum in the Punjab, and I think you'll find it won't be 95% of Indian Sikhs oppose Khalistan. Because of this strong action against Khalistan is popular among Sikhs. Is it really? Is it really? Is that why we have such a large following? Is that why all the pro-Khalistan channels on YouTube have a huge following, particularly amongst the diaspora, but also amongst the overall Sikh community? I'm sorry, but the evidence belies your criticism. So, and then Paul Best, boring programme. That is your prerogative to say it is a boring programme. I am sorry if we are a boring programme. Now, unfortunately, this comment loses credibility because actually Paul Best, throughout many of our other stories, has left some fairly nasty critical comments. I think at one stage, I couldn't find this comment, James, to show it up. It disappeared. I found it because actually YouTube had filtered it out. And then when I ticked it saying, yes, right, please display this, I approve this comment. And it said, you are both monkeys. So apparently, James, we are both monkeys. So unfortunately, Paul Best, if you're going to criticise our programme, yeah, I'll take a comment like boring programme seriously. But unfortunately, you just called us monkeys and amongst many other things. So, yeah, your comment stands no credibility. Now, let's get serious. This is a serious comment.
Bananas are my favorite fruit, Angus.
Yeah, and if we are genuinely a boring programme, switch yourself, watch somebody else. Or, if we're boring, tell us what you'd like to watch. But anyway, enough of that. Uday Chima, this is a serious comment. Oh God, that's what my dad did and said. My dad used to tell me stories of him witnessing the Punjab police dumping dead bodies of young innocent Sikhs. My dad speaks on Khalistan and can never return to India. Now, this is, I think, a reference to the generational message of the older generations who experienced the Punjab in the 1970s, 80s and 90s, those terrible times when extrajudicial killings were the norm, when almost a whole generation of young Sikh men were taken into the countryside and essentially murdered in cold blood. And here we have a young son of somebody who's experienced that, who said they witnessed the police dumping dead bodies of young innocent Sikhs. It's here we have first-hand stories of what happened in those days. And we've talked about the Sikh youth, the young generation, that they must be made aware of this. Fortunately, this chap has been told by his own father of what he witnessed. And we hope that the young Sikh, the young Sikh in our audience, the young Sikhs who are maybe watching this, talk to your elders, talk to the older generations, understand what they witnessed, what they saw. It is almost unbelievable, and that's why you need to hear these things, because it does sound, in our modern, comfortable, cotton wool wrapped world, it does sound incredible, these stories. They almost sound unreal, but they really happened. They were awful, awful events. They were genocides in the true sense of the word. So listen to your older generations, hear their stories, believe them, and never forget them. Remember them and tell your own children, because these stories must never be forgotten. They must never be buried. We must never let India bury these stories. They must continue to be told, and generations be reminded of these terrible crimes that were perpetrated by India. James, any comments on that?
Just a thank you for sharing that with us. And we know that it's tough sometimes to recall the negative or the traumatic stories that you've heard, but we appreciate you speaking out and sharing that with us.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for sharing that comment. Right, the kirpan. We have been corrected to some degree. The kirpan is not a knife. It is a mini sword. So if I refer to it as a knife, I apologise. Now I know. It is a mini sword. So it shouldn't be called a knife. That's why we're fighting for our own country, so we can practice our faith freely, being in foreign countries. It really keeps us from taking Amrit because people don't want to be victims of hate due to their identity. Well, firstly, yes, absolutely. Khalistan, of course, you will be able to practice your Sikhi unmolested, no problems, of course. But the interesting comment here, James, Amrit. I thought, okay, what is Amrit? I've heard of it. Let me educate our non-Sikh viewers what Amrit is being referred to here. And Amrit, Sikhs who have been, I beg your pardon, I'll start that again. Sikhs who have been through the Amrit ceremony. It is an initiation ceremony, or otherwise known as Amrit Sanskar. They become baptised Sikhs. They take new names, they wear the 5 Ks that we referred to before. The Amrit ceremony is the initiation rite introduced by the 10th, last, final living Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, when he founded the Khalsa in 1699. Now, Sikh can go through this initiation as soon as they're old enough to understand the full commitment that they're making. The ceremony takes place in a Gurdwara. It takes place before the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, that's the scriptures, and in the presence of 5 initiated Sikhs, and they represent the Panj Pyaras. They were the first 5 Sikhs to be initiated in that very first ceremony by the 10th Sikh, the 10th Guru, beg your pardon. During the ceremony, hymns are recited from the 6 scriptures, prayers are said, and the principles of Sikhi are affirmed. When Amrit is prepared, Amrit is a mixture of sugar and water that's been stirred with a double-edged sword. The candidates for initiation drink some of the Amrit from the same bowl, have it sprinkled on their eyes and hair, then recite the Mool Mantra, that's the fundamentals of Sikhi, and there are readings from the Guru Granth Sahib and an explanation of the rules of Sikhism. The ceremony ends with the eating of the ceremonial Kara Parshad. Parshad is a sweet-tasting food which has been blessed. It's made from semolina, sugar and ghee. So thank you, user whatever, for a very educational comment, and it's prompted me and James to learn, and indeed our non-Sikh audience to learn what Amrit, what actually happens during Amrit, and of course the significance of the mini sword, the kirpan. So thank you for that comment. Manny. Again, we're talking about the kirpan and this taxi driver who was arrested. This enforcement targeting Sikh taxi driver for the kirpan is surprising and obviously racial. And again, as we said, James, we don't think it was racist, do we?
I don't believe it was. I think it was just very uneducated on the Sikh religion and beliefs.
Yeah, as we said yesterday, I don't think it was racially motivated. It was an accidental racism. It was discrimination. It was discrimination more than racism. Given that everyone in the US knows Sikh practices, and the other fact is majority of US population carry guns with them, that's a good point. First Amendment gives them the right to arms, so clearly making a tiny kirpan a big issue is condemnable, contemptible. Yes, I agree with that, absolutely agree with that. But not everyone in the US does know Sikh practices, and this is the whole point. And I think this is what we've referred to, again in stories yesterday, is all about education, is that a lot of US and Canadian and of course across the Western world, many people are not aware, they are not educated about Sikhi, the 5Ks, the carrying of the kirpan, etc. And this is actually the root cause of the problem. It's not racism as such. It is uneducated. It is not being aware of the fact of what Sikhi stands for and what the kirpan particularly stands for. So, but thank you for that comment. And then Khalistani Jat says, this is an interesting one. To keep checks and balances in South Asia, we need Sikhs, Christians and Buddha countries. If I interpret that comment correctly, I think what you're saying is that actually we should have separate countries for Sikhs, Christians and Buddhists. I'm not sure I agree with that. Now, of course, naturally, as the world and society has evolved, we do tend to have majority religious populations like, for example, Pakistan Muslims, India Hindus, Bangladesh Muslims, etc. And Khalistan, well, it's interesting. Should we have Khalistan as a Sikh-only country? No, it won't be, in my understanding. Of course it won't be a Sikh-only country. It will be founded on Sikhi principles, but as we have said, and as many Khalistanis say on regular occasions, it will be a completely open society who will welcome all religions and faiths. All people of all cultures will be very welcome in Khalistan. There will be no discrimination. And I think your comment here is well-meaning, and I totally understand where it's coming from. And actually, arguably, it could solve an awful lot of problems in practical terms. In reality, I think all it does, it's almost divisive in its own nature. I think if you have separate countries, then is that necessarily a good thing? I think in a perfect ideological world, we all live together in harmony. That's a very, very ideological statement. But yeah, that is the goal. That is the aspiration, I think, of all societies, is that we all live together side by side, as we do in many countries, in many multicultural countries. Here in the UK, to a very large degree, fortunately, we have most faiths living side by side quite happily. There are exceptions to that, but on the whole. And I think maybe, James, that's the aspiration rather than separate countries.
Yeah, I'd hate to see a passive-aggressive isolation of groups of people. I think that Khalistan, as you said, would be an amazing country that welcomes everyone to practice their own religion and live their own life, which I think is just amazing.
Yeah, segregation, I think, is never a good thing. I think I understand where the comment's coming from. I'm not sure it ironically would be for the best interests of the global community, should we say. Grewal Sequinder.
Yeah, exactly.
Grewal Sequinder says, great show, thank you. I'm 100% sure that Modi can't write a single word of any book. This, of course, refers to Mr. Modi's book that is about to be released by Penguin Publishers, is his thoughts on the issue of J&K, his revocation of Article 370 of the Constitution, removing the special reserve status of J&K. And Narendra Modi has allegedly written a book about it, saying what a great achievement it was and how wonderful it was and why it was the best thing ever, etc. And Grewal very cynically says, absolutely no chance. A person who can't say a word without reading from paper can write a book. This is the biggest joke of the century. Well, it may well be. And actually, I think, James, quite often we have very high-profile figures who write books. In fact, they are ghost-written by writers for them on their behalf. I think that's quite common here in the West, isn't it?
My thought, Angus.
Yeah. So yes, I think, Grewal, it is very likely that Narendra Modi's book was actually ghost-written by somebody else. So thank you for that comment. Mukhtar Singh, India is heading towards breakup. Modi will be responsible for it. Modi's only interest is to load more money onto Ambani and Adani. Well, the allegation here is very clear, is that billionaires all stick together. The rich and the powerful all stick together. Mr. Modi has been accused on many occasions of favouring billionaires, and I've got to choose my words carefully for legal reasons, is that he has been alleged to have helped billionaires achieve contracts to enrich themselves, and one wonders what Mr. Modi gets in return. It's the age-old story, James. It's politicians lining their own pockets with their billionaire friends, isn't it?
It's something we see time and time again, Angus.
And how interesting that at the billionaire's wedding recently in India, present were most of the powerful of India's elite. The politicians were there, many of them with one or two exceptions, but most of the powerful politicians were there. Why were they at a billionaire's wedding? Tony Blair was there, Boris Johnson, these high-profile politicians from the UK were there, and many other high-profile politicians were at this Indian billionaire's wedding. Why? Were they friends? One wonders. Yes, so Mukhtar Singh, thank you for that comment. And I think it just highlights what all of us already suspect. India's heading towards breakup. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but yes, absolutely. It is possible, and it may happen very quickly whenever it does happen. And then final comment to wrap the show up, because again, we are hugely over time, as always. Reveal a pattern. People will remember you guys when we will have Khalistan. You guys playing your part so perfectly. Well, thank you very much for that comment. And of course, it refers to our comment, James, that if and when, not if, when Khalistan happens, that James and I will present our show from the capital of Khalistan. We will present a live show, hopefully in front of a live audience of the citizens of Khalistan. Oh, what a wonderful statement that would be. The citizens of Khalistan watching our show live in the capital. And thank you for your thanks. Absolutely. We are doing our bit. So thank you for your appreciation. And on behalf of James and myself, thank you to each and every one of you who have supported this channel. James, any comments on that?
No, I think you've already said them all, Angus. It's a great comment. Thank you.
Indeed. But there we must wrap the show up because once again we're so far beyond time it almost doesn't matter now. But that of course was Perspectives. Don't forget to keep those comments coming in. We've had loads of great comments. They are pouring in and we do love to talk about them. So do keep them coming in. Keep them educational. Keep them of course polite and civil. And of course if you have any criticisms, send them in as well. And of course if you need to correct us. We do enjoy being corrected too. It's an educational journey for myself and James. Don't forget of course that you can message us directly at message@satellage.tv.com, as many of you have done, and do let us know of any news stories that you'd like us to highlight and bring to our attention. But in the meantime, it is a goodbye from me and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have of course been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.